Oh, okay. I'd like to thank you for coming here, and what I have is a skull and heap view. This is actually looking from what's now Camden, looking across at Philadelphia, and you can see Christ Church, and what we're going to do now is move to the south to Independence Hall. And the other great thing about this is you can really see the prominence that these towers played in the skyline of Philadelphia. I always like to show a picture of Independence Hall when I'm talking about it, but I also want to reinforce that the Chestnut Street elevation is the front of the building. A lot of times we forget this in historic buildings, so I always want to start with the front of the building. And this photograph is from before, in the 1880s, 1890s, before the Robert Mills business wings were taken down. The other thing I have to say is most of what I know about the tower is due to Nick Giannopoulos and just the multiple times that we went up in taking tours, looking at things. And one of the first things he always said is when they started working on restoring Independence Hall, they weren't going to White House, Independence Hall, or the tower. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what that really meant. This is a picture of the inside of the White House during the restoration of the Truman administration. It's not quite the Secretary of the Interior standards about reversibility. The earliest known drawings that we have of Independence Hall is this one in John Dixon's papers and is attributed to Andrew Hamilton. And if you go up in the attic, there is the layering of structure, which I think is important. And right in here, you can see the opening for the cupola that was originally up on the roof. The other thing, one of the last projects Penny Batchelor did was to actually try and figure out what Independence Hall looked like before a tower was added. The tower was actually a building addition, and what she did was use photographs, also looking at Woolley, who built the tower, at previous buildings to try and figure out what Independence Hall's south elevation might have looked like. Here are a whole series of sketches and studies, her final sort of conjectural study of what it might have appeared like. And then we move to the good stuff, which is the tower that was commissioned and started being built in 1750 through 1754. Unfortunately, one of the things is towers are very fragile. They're up against the weather, the elements. And here's some other graphic images of it. And what happens is by 1790s, the tower's in such bad condition, the wood portion, that it actually has to be taken down. But recently, when we'd removed the windows at the third level of the tower, which is here, what we actually found, and it doesn't come across too well, but are the actual holes where they pegged in the louvers that they'd put in those window openings when they moved the bell down. They'd put in the louvers to actually help the sound from the ringing of the bell come out. And then by 1828, there's Philadelphia is again very much interested in Independence Hall, and they hire William Strickland to come in and build a new wood steeple on the existing brick base. And what I did was I actually took Keaston Hood's conjectural reconstruction of the original tower, and you can see it's a series of boxes stacked on top of one another. It has a lot of joints, very fragile, and as Nick said, that the skin is applied directly to the structural members. When Strickland comes in, he creates these two superstructures that go up. You can see these very stable. It's very much simpler. And then the dash line actually shows how the exterior cladding is held away from the interior structure. The other thing is Strickland is very much of a different age. It's an age of innovation, and he starts doing all sorts of things that are different. One of the major things he does is he changes the construction technique. As you can see down below in the lower portion, this is the 1750s tower. It's all mortise and tenon construction. This is very expensive, time-consuming, and Strickland comes in for cost savings and also innovation. All of his joints are all bolted connections, so the whole tower, when you get to all of the major structural framing members, are all bolted, and you can sort of see how the knee braces, everything's bolted together. It's much easier to do. You can lift everything up into place, bolt it. It's much similar to a steel building. You can also see how the framing, the structural framing with the knee braces, is back pulled in away from the outer skin of the wall. And this is an axonometric just showing of where we're really going to focus, which is Strickland's levels of 4, 5, and 6. There are both a lot of innovative things going on here and some things that actually caused problems when we came to actually do the restoration of the tower. One of the things that he did, and we didn't know when we started doing the work actually what purpose the iron rods, which are here, embedded in the center of the cladding. Each cladding piece is 2 3/4 inches thick, and it's eastern white pine, old growth, and they overlap. And we didn't know if this was a prefabrication technique, whether we put panels together, then lifted them in the air, or if these rods somehow were something for shear. So one of the things we did, the other thing that was really great is he built in sort of a natural drainage system, which was with these beveled joints that the cladding actually drains itself. So, you know, I'd run up there in the middle of a rainstorm with a moisture meter, poke it around, I'd get very high readings. The next day and the day after, I'd go back. And so what actually happens is when it rains, at this joint here, it actually drains out. And the only problem we found is that previously they had gone to thinking weather tighten these joints had actually installed sealant. We came back during the work and found that those areas where they'd installed sealant was actually where we were getting rot. In sort of wondering where this idea came from for embedding the iron rods, we started looking at what Strickland had previous experience in. In 1824, he was sent to England to look at canal building, and we think this may have influenced his building of the tower, that he took some of the details that he saw in canal building and actually translated them into the building of the tower. This is an example of his patent for a lock. This is an actual aqueduct that's on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And here again, you can actually see iron rods that are embedded in the wood to hold things together. The other thing I did was I dragged my mother on one vacation up to Chittenango Canal Boat Museum. It's along the Erie Canal. And what they have there are canal boats. And canal boats are basically wood boxes. They have, what they would do is in the winter, they would mill the wood and do iron bars, the bolts, the nails, that sort of thing. And so you can actually see we have a very similar profile with the beveled siding on the outside. We have the knee braces, and actually sunk in the Erie Canal, you can see where the iron rods are coming up out of the board. This is a late 19th century canal boat, and what I'm trying to do is find examples now that maybe go earlier into the 19th century. And the one corner picture is actually of Independence Hall, and you can see the similarity of construction. Well, one thing we did was we tried to figure out, with the water moving in and out of the wood cladding, what was happening to those iron rods. So we got up there, we did basically x-rays of the cladding at various spots, and what we found was where we didn't have water, the iron rods were pretty much intact, but then when you come up to a joint where you get water infiltration, what you start to see is the deformation, and here the rust is actually bleeding into the wood. And what that causes is caused iron sickness. And iron sickness, it's a term that comes out of railroad construction, actually causes the wood fibers to break apart and will lead to the failure of the wood. And this X-ray here is actually in that very location. So what we did was we decided to actually start taking the tower apart. And so we removed everything. And what I have is before shots that you can actually see. We took all the wreaths off, laid them out on a table, inspected each piece of wood. There's what the condition of the wreath was after it's stripped. And here on this side is actually the wreath being reinstalled. You have a pilaster capital on one side prior to restoration, after restoration and reinstalled. Down on the 18th century tower, actually when we got to the wood capitals, we found out that they probably cut corners, because rather than using a single block of wood, what they did was in the shop, they took pieces of wood, varying sizes, and glued them all together, and then carved the capital. So what happens is when we started stripping it, the wood glue came apart, all of the capitals completely fell apart. We had to take them into the shop, re-glue them, reinstall them. The first thing we did to make sure about installing the cladding properly did shop drawings. Each piece of cladding was measured, numbered. You can see the rods were all located. This is both for level 6. Level 5. Initially, we went through and just did an eye survey to see if there was actually cladding that we could save. The gray are the members that we thought we couldn't save because of the bowing out and the expansion and the falling apart of the wood fibers due to the iron sickness. We then took each elevation, put it down on the ground, and surveyed each board. And this is an example of the iron sickness, where you can see that the wood fibers have actually become like hair coming apart. But then what we discovered was in the base and in the tops, we actually got iron jacking. And this long crack there is actually from the expansion of rust and split the boards apart. And at one point, we got a sample of the cladding, but what we actually uncovered was, this is a typical iron rod. You can see how it's great here, and then when it gets to this, it actually has lost its entire thickness. And this is probably the most spectacular photograph I've taken, because you are now seeing what was only seen before in 1828, where the cladding is completely off, the structure is completely exposed, and as Nick said, we've sacrificed the outer skin, but the structure is actually completely intact. There's some areas where we had to reinforce with some new structure here and there. You can see some 60s structure, if it were clear, that was in to address some problems, but this is really great. And actually, when I pointed it out to the carpenters, all of a sudden a myriad of cell phones came out and they started recording it. I put this in because one of the things that we were actually insistent on doing was duplicating the construction. So we actually went out and got old growth eastern white pine, specified the number of rings, and then duplicated the construction where we overlap the rods. Instead of putting them in iron to relieve the problem, we use stainless steel, put in the bolts. At the corners, we duplicated the construction here, whether it was beveled or butted. And then the one thing we did do at various locations was install new lead-coated flashing to help drainage of water. And finally, down in this corner, began to work with flashing and how to reinstall the wood wreaths. The other thing I thought, in all of the pictures, it's good to actually see master builders. And these are all carpenters that are working on the scaffolding, installing the new cladding. We even have one carpenter down here, a carpenter's apprentice, who's not only getting trained on the site, but here is actually coming and tightening down one of the screws. We planed down the wood, sanded it, and prepped it for painting. And finally, this is the stage we're at now. We're almost complete. The wreaths installed, all of the decorative members that have been conserved are reinstalled. And finally, we're pretty much on date. We may be done a little bit sooner than we thought. I think scaffolding may come down, cross my heart, in the end of November. That's what I hope. I think we have substantial completion maybe around the 20th or something of November. And finally, I always like to end with this, which is this ad that I found, which I think really sort of typifies Philadelphia and what's going on in the city. Was that too quick?
No, that's fine. It's wonderful.
Thanks, Nick. And Nick will join us towards the end of this discussion of Franklin Court. And we've called this the evolution of Franklin Court, but in a way it's a great case study in the shifting or sort of the evolution of attitudes towards both preservation and interpretation, and in the case of Franklin Court, also commemoration. So Franklin Court, as it exists today, in 1950, looked like this. This was Oriana Street, looking north. Obviously, the area had evolved significantly since Franklin's time and had become part of the industrial, commercial, old city that largely exists today. Oops. This is Market Street as we know it today. This was Market Street as it was in 1950, just before work. Actually, just before the Park Service gained control of the site in 1948. So this will be a discussion of how we went from here to there. This is a wonderful print drawing by Frank Taylor done in 1915. Again, this is a view from Oriana Street, looking north. In 1812, Franklin had sold his property, and his heirs divided the court into 30 house lots, filling the court, and Oriana Street was created. There was a lot known about Franklin Court, primarily through deeds and the wonderful insurance surveys that exist and lots of correspondence. Much was known about the house, and they knew where it was. And as the sesquicentennial approached in 1940, there was kind of a renewed interest in this idea of commemorating Franklin and also restoring the house. As Dr. Richard Shyrock, who was a librarian at the American Philosophical Society, said at the time, "Franklin is a man we cannot leave to the imagination." That was a great quote. Back to 1950. In 1948, the congressional subcommittee hearings were taking place to establish the park in Philadelphia. It was broken into segments, and there was a particularly kind of interesting dialogue at the congressional hearings regarding the purchase of this particular piece of the park. And I'm going to quote a little bit from this. Representative Scott says, "I think that this is one site, is it not, where there is a possibility of reconstruction because they have not only the old wall, but they have enough detail of Franklin's home to reconstruct." Mr. Rockwell says, "What would be the cost of that for the building and reconstruction? No one is more an admirer of Ben Franklin than I, but I wondered if there was not some place to add value other than just a lot, 20 by 30, and a wall that is more or less fallen down." A little further in the discussions, Mr. Scott says, "With the historical knowledge that is in the hands of the Philadelphia Historical Society, I feel that if this area in Project C, it could be put to great proper use in giving the people of the country an opportunity to see the environment in which Ben Franklin lived in his own immediate personal life." Then another representative, "There is one further consideration that weighed heavily on us, the fact that there is no national memorial or shrine to Benjamin Franklin in the national park system, and there are to most, in some way, our great historical figures have been commemorated, but Franklin has not been." So you see this complex idea of memorial, of reconstruction. What should we do? Again, Mr. Rockwell, not to be denied, he is certainly one of our great Americans and did a great deal. Still, a vacant lot full of weeds, 20 feet square, to spend $500,000? It seems there might be some better monument we could get. Sort of how right he was in some ways, but then again, Mr. Barrett, I think in the end, the chairman says, "The importance, too, of this little house, if you read the dimensions, it was not a fabulous place at all, but a little house, which eventually found necessary to expand. But in any event, it looks to me like it is a historic site, and one if we cannot restore it, at least it should be preserved properly," whatever that means. "It seems to me that it is properly included, and I would like to move, Mr. Chairman, that we include Project C." Shortly thereafter began a series of archaeological excavations to determine, actually let's go back, to determine really what existed, what might be found to help in this restoration or recreation or commemoration. In 1953 and 1955, the National Park Service archaeologist Paul Shoemaker was able to undertake very limited excavations. He was not allowed to dig in Oriana Street. He was able to dig in the sidewalk on some of these empty lots and in the basements that existed. His excavations concluded that there was no rising wall of Franklin's house. In fact, the basements on both sides of the houses built by Franklin's heir had gone deeper than Franklin's house and had obliterated basically all of the remains. However, he did find under the sidewalk a piece of an east wall foundation. Shortly after this, in 19, seem to have lost an image here. In 1958, actually Park Service was able to demolish the houses, and in 1960 and 61, excavations under the guidance of Bruce Powell, the archaeologist, located additional foundations describing the east, north, and south walls, privies, and other appurtenances to Franklin Court. He also was able to excavate in the basements of some of the Market Street houses, and found, again, some evidence that there were remains of the earlier structures along Market. There we go. Those excavations became part of a historic structures report that was published in 1961. Dennis Kerjack was the acting park superintendent at that time and issued this report. And the archaeological discovery seemed to lend great optimism to the possibility of actually reconstructing Franklin's house. And from his report, I'll read this to you. A great deal is already known about the physical history of the house, and there is every expectation that further research will provide us with a near complete knowledge of the structure. A wealth of archaeological data and artifacts, including foundations of the east, north, and south walls, an east-west portion which divided the basement into sections, remains of a circular ice house, the necessary and fragments of building materials would permit reconstruction of the house on the exact site of the original and a high degree of accuracy in the use of construction material. Well, what did they really know? They had some of the foundations uncovered. This was the only extant drawing known of the plan of the house, and this is believed to have been done by Ben Franklin on the back side of a document that existed at the American Philosophical Society. And you can see the house. This was actually the north side, a stairwell, a large dining room, 2 parlors, and an off-central hallway. I guess these are considered to be windows, doors, chimney, table. And I guess based on a lot of the descriptions of the house, historians are actually able to glean a lot from this little sketch. But from this sketch, as again in the Kerjack Historic Structures Report, this, again, unbridled optimism. This is the staircase as it could be reconstructed from the information that we know. And this was a very simpler time. This was a preliminary estimate of cost. $590,200, and I wonder where the $200 came from. Well, actually after that report, the site stayed fallow for some time. And then beginning in 1970 through 1973, Barbara Leggett undertook additional excavations on the site. You can see some of the coverings over the earlier work that had been done. Barbara Leggett's excavations brought out a lot more detail about the time of Franklin, all of the materials that were found in the privies, but really did not uncover much of real significance in terms of what Franklin's house looked like. I think a garden wall was uncovered. A lot of more information was gleaned about the Market Street houses, including definite locations of foundation walls and party walls that continued to exist. So in 1970, what had been discovered? And essentially, this is to the left here is Franklin's house, and to the north are the Market Street houses. And you can see in dark, these are the fragments of foundations that were found, and you can see they neatly correspond to where Oriana Street was. Really, most of the information that was found survived only because it was under the street, not disturbed by basements. You can see bits of the garden wall that were found here, then a whole series of test pits and many, many privies and other kind of storage devices. So the excavation material, along with descriptions, enabled this sort of sketchy reconstruction of the site. These came from Barbara Liggett's report. Ben Franklin began assembling his properties in the 1730s to build his house. His house was built began in 1763 with Robert Smith as carpenter and Samuel Rhodes as supervisor. It's unclear, both of those were architects as well as builders. It's unclear who actually designed the house, but both were involved. The house was completed in 1766, 3 years in the making, much to the dissatisfaction of Franklin. And then between the 1763 and 1780s, Franklin acquired the properties some of the properties along Market Street. You can see originally when the house was built, he actually had a drive that came in to the west and entered the court. To the north, he acquired 3 houses that existed on Market Street, and he never gained ownership of these 2 abutting properties. Then in 1886, the print shop was built, a library was added to his house, and he demolished the 3 houses on Market Street and built the houses that are reconstructed today and created the covered passage that currently is now there that enters the courtyard. He then built a 3rd house on the previous site of his driveway. So after all of this, the bicentennial was approaching, and still this question remained. What did Franklin's house look like? This is from 1972, I believe. They were desperate to find more information about what the house looked like. We are going to make a worldwide search for anyone having a watercolor or anything else which will help show us what the house looked like. For the loan of such picture, the commission will trade an all-expenses-paid trip to Philadelphia, a visit to Franklin Court, and a specially designed Franklin medal. Well, I guess that was not incentive enough to produce any more information. The only real image that seemed to exist was this advertisement from 1797 for the rental of Franklin's house. In the meantime, there were continued so the process of thinking about what can we do? We don't have much, we have no real substantial information about what the house looked like. We know what its footprint was. We know a little more about the Market Street houses. All the way back in the 50s, actually, this was after the preliminary excavations. This is hard to see, but this is a wonderful Grant Simon idea about how the Franklin might be memorialized. It's essentially a garden with just the walls of the house brought up to probably about waist height, and a little museum tucked in the niche here. He did about three or four of these schemes. In the late 1960s, Penny Batchelor, who was a park historical architect at the time, came up with her notion of what might, how this site might be interpreted and not reconstructed. And you can see she was a student of Mies, and she has proposed a sort of a Miesian box that sits over the remains, very transparent, and allows you to actually see in. And again, the program was getting larger. The museum now started the museum was accompanied by a lecture hall. The program was obviously growing. This is another actually wonderful sketch by Penny Batchelor that shows the Market Street houses realized in Corten steel. Obviously, the Park Service and others were really struggling with how do we interpret this? We can't reconstruct it. We just don't have enough information. And in fact, here even they were thinking about not reconstructing the Market Street houses. This is another Penny Batchelor sketch. Believe it or not, I have to read this to you. It says, Market Street facades by cathode tube a la Venturi. This is from the 60s. In March of 1972, Venturi and Rauch was commissioned by the Park Service and then Superintendent Hobie Kaywood to design, to figure out how this site should be developed, given the information that was known. The program had grown, the bicentennial was rapidly approaching, and it was clear by this time that there had been a big focus shift in attitudes towards preservation, and we had moved fully away from the idea of restoring or recreating something that we knew a good bit about, but really not quite enough about to reconstruct. The shift was really towards more of an educational, interpretive approach, one that celebrated the process that we heard about earlier of the discovery, the archaeological work, the years and years of thinking about how, not only what was there, but how should it be shown, was an important story to tell in its own right. The idea for the ghost house came really early, apparently, and it wasn't an aha moment. Bob just says it came, but it came really out of the process of the quandary of thinking about what would be appropriate given what we know, and given the need not just to interpret the site and understand the site, but commemorate Franklin as well. And so I think that's an important dimension to remember. This is a little bit hard to see, but here they are standing down on one of the excavation holes, holding an early model, and that's Bob Venturi right there with the model. Things were moving really fast at this point. There was still sort of explorations going on to figure out specifically about what the Market Street houses looked like, or even what their volumes were. You can see in this model, this is a shrimpy one, this is a little less shrimpy, and these are the three that were owned by Franklin. You can see the print shop is much more to the north than it ended up, and I'm still not quite sure what this ghost structure was there. This was an early model, but work was still ongoing. Research was still ongoing. And I should mention then that the team that was assembled for this project included Venturi and Rauch at that time, Nick Giannopoulos, and also John Milner Associates. And the decision was made that obviously that not enough was known about Franklin's house, and the iconic ghost structure was sort of rapidly accepted as an appropriate response. But more was known about these houses, and the decision was made to actually reconstruct the exterior of those, but not the interiors. And John Milner was the architect responsible for really uncovering, exploring and uncovering what was known in terms of physical evidence for the Market Street houses. Franklin Court, as it exists today, the houses on Market Street with their restored facades here, but I think in the interior you can see, Nick will talk a bit about this, but there's what I call the internal ghost structure, Nick's steel structure that was required to stabilize those buildings. The park as it developed, and I think it's important to remember that this was seen not only as a memorial to Franklin, but also as part of an urban system of greenways and green spaces, and also the need to marshal lots of visitors who would then proceed down ramps to the museum. As you all know, the museum is down underground now, and the firm actually was not responsible for designing the museum exhibits proper. And then the idea for the remainder of the site was to develop it as an educational tool, not to recreate elements, but to put elements in there that were overscaled, were abstracted in a way, abstract elements of what might have existed in the 18th century. The museum down below. Here you can see the remnants of Franklin's house were preserved in that area and are visible from the scoops that you see today. And connection through was underground, enabled mechanical systems to extend into the Market Street houses. The ghost structure on its way, and the ghost structure under construction. And Franklin Court, as we know it today, with elements that were designed not as replications of anything, but simply somewhat abstract, bigger scaled interpretations of 18th century elements. And there you can see that in the benches and the arbor, obviously not from the 18th century, but indicative of purpose and intent. Meanwhile, back on Market Street, this was, actually here you can see the passageway. This is what existed in 1950 when the Park Service took control of the site. Again, part of the sort of industrial commercial development of Old City. In 1964, the buildings were actually condemned, and a good portion of them were actually taken down. And as Nick describes it, when he first saw the site, it was sheathed in plywood. And with that, I think we'll pass it on to Nick to talk about what was done inside to the Market Street houses.
We're going to finish up with the Home Depot approach to fixing old buildings or reconstructing them. But I had the good fortune of being brought in a few years earlier before Venturi and Rauch to assess the condition of the remnants that Barbara Liggett was exploring, doing her archaeological digs. And, it was a very slow process, but, I got to be quite familiar with what was there. And then when it finally came time to do the reconstruction later with John Milner and so on, everything just fell into place very, very nicely. What we have here is a rendered, this was one of the contract drawings, and I had it colored with pencil so I could illustrate what was happening down at the basement level of the Market Street houses. Market Street was at this lower perimeter here. This is the vaults under Oriana Street, the passageway that went back into the interior court. We have shown here the privies galore, and not only the privies, but the pits used for tanning leather when this inn building was a leather facility of some kind or other. What you then also see here are the fact that we ran many of the heating, ventilating, air conditioning ducts below the basement floor because there simply wasn't the dimension to do it within the buildings themselves because the floor-to-floor heights were so shallow. This is like the first floor plan of the same. This is the Oriana Street. Where's that button? The Oriana Street passage. This inn building here next to Channel 29, which is here, did not have a historic party wall on the west, but what we have here shown in red are the party walls that remain from Franklin's houses. Part of our planning was to anticipate the sequence of construction and how do you get into the court, because it was a closed court coming up from Chestnut Street. It was a very narrow passage by the Maritime Museum, and there was going to be a lot of heavy traffic, moving of earth, concrete, etc. We had anticipated that by taking this last house, which was going to be a total reconstruction, and provided a passageway so that the trucks could get in from Market Street. The contractors, who were they? Shoemaker, R.M. Shoemaker and Company, when they bid the project, found that there was an unoccupied lot in this area here where there's now one of these charter schools, but it was open at the time. And they managed to rent or lease that site so that all of the material movement for and equipment movement for the project, instead of having to come through here, could now come directly in from 4th Street. Our discovery was that the party walls the remnants were very, very shabby. And we were very much concerned about, as we removed the overbuilds. The overbuilds were the conversions of the Franklin houses into mid-19th century mercantile buildings, where they changed the floor heights, the front and rear facades, the extensions, overbuilt by a floor or two. It was, the disassembly so that you could just reconstruct these was a tedious, demanding challenge. Now, this is a cross-section. Again, we will give you a reference. There is the passageway. These are the vaults below the passageway. This is the building that has the open, how would you say, it's like an open museum in that it has all of the existing wall finish remnants showing there. What we also have here were the fact that these represent the Victorian commercial floor levels. These are the reconstructed floor levels at the historic levels. And the Victorian overbuild was a floor higher up here. In fact, one of these went another floor. So our concern was to be able to install, we could no longer use the party walls for any support. So we then designed a series of little one building wide structures of light frame steel, which we dropped between the party walls and then interconnected. For instance, there's a column for this building here. There's a column for this one. And so then you can't see it here, but we interconnected the frames through the party wall, thereby got the stiffness of the whole group of 5 buildings to brace the party walls. But not only that, if you see these lightly dotted X's, they represent, as the steel had been installed and before the Victorian floors had been removed, we braced everything, and then everything was reduced manually. We were concerned about collapse. Fortunately, it didn't happen. Now, this is kind of a small diagram here. Market Street, in this case, is in this area. This is the passageway for Oriana Street, a different scale than what you were just seeing there. And we now see these little structures of lightweight steel framing with bar joist floors being installed typically here to have fireproof construction and also to have the load capability for the occupancy required by the Park Service. Off on the right here is a cross-section showing how the frame had been installed. And I'd like to point out to you, this is underpinning. And the reason we have the underpinning is in some cases the bottoms of the foundation walls were pretty bad condition. But one of the things we had is that Barbara Liggett and her people just trenched the daylight out of the basements of these buildings, completely undercut the bottoms of the foundation walls, which were right at this level. And here were these continuous pits here that they had opened up and just put loose soil back into them. Well, of course, that provided very little restraint to the soil under the wall moving outward. So we needed to come back later and underpin the walls to stabilize them. This is a diagram of the reconstructed houses, but I want you to notice this light blue. This represents that when the front wall on Market Street and the south wall back in the court were constructed, it was constructed of not 8 inches, but 12 inches of masonry, 4 inches of brick, and then we had the 8-inch backup, and the reason for that is it enabled us to run pipes and ducts and everything in that 8-inch dimension, but it also permitted us to construct a continuous bond beam here to keep the facade together, because what had happened was that there were the juxtaposition historically of openings over openings here just destroyed the masonry. There was no really good load path in the elevation for that. Okay, that what we saw was the Market Street elevation. This is the south elevation where, again, where we had the bond beam and all this crazy juxtaposition of openings here. Now, one of the things that, you know, we, yesterday I'd mentioned how at the APS we had these discoveries, and the real issue was, and this was from Milner, and he really was pretty astute about it, was how do you really qualify that when you reconstruct these elevations that you're doing them with some measure of accuracy? And so references had to exist in the concealed finishes or where finishes had once been, that when you put the crossword puzzle together, you suddenly have the controls for an elevation. And one of the primary controls for the elevation are what are known as the corbel blocks. There was, at that location and at this location here, buried in the walls, whenever they tore down the rear of the Franklin houses and extended them as commercial extensions, they simply butted the new walls against the old, and the corbel blocks remained in place, and they were plastered over, and we then discovered them later. Wait.
It's actually a block there.
Wait, that's not the corbel block. Oh, the corbel block is up above there, up in here. And what we had seen, this is the end joint. This is the Market Street house. This is the Victorian extension. And the crack in the plaster told us what existed there. Well, here we found the configuration of the corbel block, Milner did, which then gave you the cross-section of the cornice. So, Charlie? I'm sorry, I don't hear you. Oh, okay, all right, okay. One more and we quit, whether we're finished or not. Well, all right, okay, but this was a very important thing in conjunction with insurance descriptions and some of the other houses that the carpenters had built at that time throughout Philadelphia. So the pieces came together and enabled them to do that. Oh, no, wrong button. Well, anyways, these were pictures in the basement of the pits, et cetera, et cetera. And this shows that temporary bracing I had mentioned to you before. And we had saved the party walls, and now we're in the process of putting it together. And so there we have it, and we're finished.
We learned today, I hope we learned today, that our goal for preservation needs to be larger than preservation itself. And we started, Nick and I started with an idea about Charlie Peterson, from Charlie Peterson, and it is perhaps fitting that the last time many of us gathered in this space, it was to memorialize Charlie Peterson. So, but it was Nick It was Nick who refined, we are not preserving early America, we are in fact preserving America, and exactly what Brown had said to us today. You're going to have a tour of potentially 4 different ways of preservation. John Milner gave us many, many more, but you're going to have 4 different ways of preservation. We have to find our own paths, but I'd just like you to reflect as you go through that. We can perfectly preserve this tower to the way John Adams saw it, but again, based on Brown Morton's comments, can we really truly understand why John Adams had to climb that tower? Because it was the tallest space, the tallest structure in the United States, or in the colonies at the time, the closest that man had ever built to heaven. Can we truly understand that when we ourselves fly above the clouds? On the other hand, we can, as Dan has shown us, we can build a ghost house and imagine what it was like. What would let our spirits soar? Let us try and find that. Or we can go to Independence Hall Tower and realize that's not the tower our founders ever saw. It's something else, something even grander. And millions of people have come to that tower, to that hall, to be inspired by it. In fact, millions of non-Americans have come to that. But I remember, or I want to read to you something that was prophetic, frighteningly prophetic, about an individual who came to that tower and that stood in the shadow of that tower that our founders had never seen. He stopped on his way to Washington, to become the 16th president of the United States. And in a speech he had not anticipated to make, he said, "All the political sentiments I entertain have been drawn, so far as I have been able to draw them, from the sentiments which originated and were given to the world from this hall in which we stand. I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence. It was that which gave promise that in due time the weights should be lifted from the shoulders of all men, and that all should have an equal chance. Now, my friends, can this country be saved from that basis? If it can, I will consider myself one of the happiest men in the world if I can help save it. But if this country cannot be saved without giving up that principle, I would rather be assassinated on this spot." The crowd paused, obviously. And he went on. He says, "My friends, this is wholly unprepared speech. I did not expect to be called upon to say a word when I came here. I may therefore have said something indiscreet, but I have said nothing but what I am willing to live by, and in the presence of Almighty God, die by." Or, and I think that may bring us to the final hole in the ground. We can certainly judge our founders, but how will we have to judge ourselves? As we preserve the story of our most heinous aspect of our national past, do we tear down or do we build up? Is the Washington House half built, waiting for us to complete the foundations he and our founders put down for us? Or is it half gone because it was a tragic hypocrisy unworthy of being remembered? If we truly wish to understand the past, we need to do even more than dig with the dentist picks and scrape with paintbrushes. We need to pause and look deeper than we sometimes care to, but Brown Morton has challenged us to. We need to look within ourselves to see the future we are preserving and creating for those who follow us. Yes, indeed, we can, in my opinion, we can do the precision of this church's tower in preservation. We can do the fabrication in all sense of the word of Independence Hall. We can do the sobering partial restoration of the President's House, or the whimsical imaginings of Franklin Court. We have our choices, but but perhaps our best choice, whatever that choice might be, when it comes to preserving America, would be something else that Abraham Lincoln wrote when he said, "America is God's last best hope for mankind."